Part 5. Testing the Waters. The chipped yellow mug, cool against Clara's palms despite the lukewarm tea, tasted of anticipation and a faint residue of lemon. Caleb's preference. She'd begun to treat interactions as calibrations, dropping small weights onto the scale of normalcy to watch the needle tremble. It wasn't about finding Caleb anymore. Not precisely. It was about charting the circumference of his shadow, mapping the way his particular inflections had seeded themselves into the common tongue. This morning's subject, Omar, the taxi driver. The city breathed exhaust and impatience as they crawled through arteries clogged with morning commuters. She offered her frustration with the perpetually delayed subway. It's always a bit of a rodeo getting across town. Omar didn't miss a beat. A rodeo, you say? Exactly. You gotta beat those delays into submission. Caleb, he'd used beat those delays constantly. A flourish of mock bravado when facing anything less than existential crisis. A metallic tang bloomed on Clara's tongue. Not anger. Exactly. More like confirmation settling in her bones. Too precise an echo for mere coincidence. She logged it. Asterisk taxi. Beat delays. Certainty high. Asterisk. The bookstore offered another data point. The scent of old paper and vanilla hung thick in the air. Browsing poetry, she paused before a slim volume of Mary Oliver. I always prefer first editions when I can find them, she murmured to Elias, the owner, almost tasting the words before speaking them. Elias beamed, his face crinkling around his eyes. A woman of taste. You understand how important the original texture is? How it holds the author's intention, like finding the perfect first bloom. He paused, then added with a knowing smile, the ink still breathes, like finding the perfect first bloom. Caleb had said about everything from coffee beans to new pottery glazes, a phrase worn smooth by repetition. Clara felt exposed under Elias's gaze. Not merely acknowledged for her preference, but recognized, or rather, recognized as the version Caleb had carefully sculpted. She began keeping a detailed log, a worn Moleskine that felt more intimate than a clinical spreadsheet, a visual representation of the encroaching static. Location, speaker, phrase/behavior echoed, degree of certainty, low/medium/high. The list grew. A barista recommending her usual lavender latte. She'd ordered it twice with Caleb. A dog walker whistling La Vie en Rose. Mrs. Petrovich at the dry cleaners remarking on her effortlessly chic outfit. Caleb's preferred descriptor. The tests weren't purely observational anymore. She started dropping subtle cues herself, obscure references from inside jokes, tiny hooks to see who would bite. She mentioned their childhood nickname for their cat, Sir Reginald Fluffington, to Mrs. Petrovich at the dry cleaners. Mrs. Petrovich nodded sagely and remarked, "Such a regal name for such a fluffy gentleman." Each confirmation felt like both vindication and violation. A quiet triumph laced with something akin to grief. Vindication because she wasn't dissolving into madness. Violation because Caleb's influence stretched further than she'd imagined, woven into the fabric of everyday life like a creeping vine. It was as if he'd briefed everyone on how to interact with Clara, how to mirror her preferences and respond to her quirks. A silent choreography of shared understanding. She remembered one evening last fall, Caleb holding court at a dinner party, describing his ideal coffee roast. Like finding that perfect first bloom, he declared, swirling his wine glass dramatically. His friends had nodded approvingly. She laughed politely. Now that laughter felt like complicity. The feeling intensified as days blurred together. A growing sense of being observed by pleasantries and politely delivered echoes. Faces lingered just slightly longer than necessary, a flicker of recognition that held something more than friendly acknowledgement. A subtle awareness that they were aware of her and what she represented in relation to him. One evening at the laundromat, the cyclical torment chamber smelling of detergent and damp cotton, she overheard two women discussing weekend plans. "It's all a bit melancholic for such sunshine," one said with a sigh, glancing at Clara as she folded her jeans. That was Caleb's go-to assessment of any mildly optimistic situation. A backhanded compliment steeped in existential weariness. Clara froze mid-fold. The woman's face wasn't particularly striking, vaguely familiar yet indistinct, like viewing an old photograph through frosted glass. It was less about hearing the phrase and more about how she said it, the precise downward inflection Caleb had perfected. The laundromat's hum amplified a low, thrumming vibration that resonated in her teeth. The rotating drums seemed to mock her churning out clean clothes while simultaneously churning up unsettling truths. She wasn't simply observing echoes anymore. She was wading through them, feeling their weight press down on her chest. A drowning sensation in lukewarm water and detergent scent. The sunshine outside felt less like warmth and more like a spotlight illuminating her increasingly fragile composure. She felt like an insect pinned beneath glass, carefully observed, continuously tested, and slowly losing grip on what was truly hers. And yet there was something strangely comforting in it all, almost like being known, even if that knowledge stemmed from Caleb's carefully constructed legacy, like being cataloged, filed away under Caleb's Clara, perhaps being seen, even through his eyes, was better than being invisible after all. But where did she begin and he end? The question hung heavy in the humid air, swirling amongst the steam and spinning clothes, as if he had left behind not just phrases but an atmosphere, a calibrated emotional weather system that continued to revolve around her even in his absence. Across from her at the laundromat sat a young woman with bright pink hair, meticulously folding fitted sheets, utterly focused on her task without making eye contact. She radiated an almost startling self-possession, completely unburdened by expectation or echo. Clara watched her for several moments, envy mingling with relief. Was this what freedom looked like? The hum of the drums intensified, a pulsing rhythm that seemed to burrow into her skull, and Clara realized she hadn't folded a single jean yet. Simply stood there amidst swirling laundry, suspended between recognition and dissolution, wondering if herself existed independent of his legacy, or if she was merely an expertly crafted reverberation.